Blood, Bullets, and Brotherhood, the savage saga of the Dalton gang. Like storm clouds gathering over the Kansas prairie, the Dalton brothers rode into Western history trailing thunder and lightning in their wake. Their story ain't just another tale of outlaws gone wrong, it's a twisted yarn of lawmen turned bad, of brother standing by brother, and of ambition that blazed as hot as a prairie fire until it finally consumed near everything it touched. The seeds of rebellion. Back when the Indian Territory was still wild as a Mustang, the Dalton clan put down roots in the dusty soil of what would later become Oklahoma. Lewis Dalton and Adeline Younger, herself kin to the notorious Younger brothers, brought 15 young uns into this world, including the boys who'd later paint their names across wanted posters from Kansas to California, Bob, Grat, and Emmet. Them Dalton boys wasn't born with 6 guns in their hands. Truth be told, they started out on the right side of the law, wearing badges bright as their mama's hopes for them. Their daddy, Lewis, served as a saloon keeper in Kansas after leaving his position as a Kentucky slave owner, teaching his boys the value of hard work and family loyalty. But sometimes the apple cart tips over in peculiar ways, and good intentions end up scattered in the dust. From lawmen to outlaws. The transformation from peace officers to outlaws wasn't no lightning strike, it was more like watching rust eat away at good steel. Bob Dalton pinned on his first badge at age 19, serving as a deputy U.S. Marshal in Arkansas. His brother Grat followed suit, and for a spell, they earned honest dollars bringing in the sort of men they'd later become. They was good at it too quick with their guns, and fearless in the saddle. But the pay was thin as winter soup, and temptation rode beside them every day. They watched train after train loaded with money roll through their territory, and somewhere along the line, the idea took root that maybe they were on the wrong side of them iron horses. As one old-timer put it, them boys could smell money like a coyote can smell fear. The making of the gang. By 1890, the Dalton boys had crossed that invisible line between law and lawlessness. Bob, the natural leader with eyes cold as December steel, gathered his brothers and started recruiting. They picked up Bill Power, Dick Broadwell, and other desperados who'd ride with them into infamy. The gang took shape like a thunderhead building on the horizon, dark, dangerous, and fixing to break. Their first major heist was a train robbery near Wharton, Indian Territory, in May 1891. It was as slick as fresh-churned butter, in and out with the money before the passengers hardly knew what hit them. The gang worked like they were born to it, each man knowing his part like actors in a well-rehearsed play. Success has a way of breeding boldness, and soon they were hitting trains and banks across Kansas, Oklahoma, and Indian Territory. The art of the heist. Them Daltons weren't just common bandits, they brought military precision to their work. Bob, who'd learned the lawman's trade, knew how to plan an operation down to the last detail. They'd scout their targets for weeks, studying schedules and habits like a hawk watching a prairie dog town. They'd cut telegraph lines to prevent word of their crimes from spreading, and always kept fresh horses stationed for quick getaways. Their signature move was hitting 2 banks in one town, a feat of outlaw audacity that hadn't been tried before. They figured lawmen would never expect such brass, and for a while, they were right. The gang would split into 2 groups, hit both banks simultaneous-like, then hightail it out while the townsfolk was still trying to figure which end was up. The code of the outlaws. Despite their turn to crime, the Daltons kept to certain principles that set them apart from common thieves. They made it a point never to rob women or working men, focusing instead on banks and railroads, institutions they saw as legitimate targets. Bob Dalton was known to say, "We ain't common thieves, we're redistributing the wealth." Of course, most of that wealth seemed to redistribute itself right into their own pockets. They were particular about their appearance too, dressing sharp as Kansas City dandies when they weren't on the job. Emmet, the youngest, was especially known for his fine clothes and courtly manners. Even during robberies, they'd often wear suits under their dusters, like they were conducting proper business instead of theft. The price of fame. As their reputation grew, so did the pressure. Pinkerton detectives dogged their trail like hungry wolves, and rewards for their capture climbed higher than a cottonwood tree. Newspapers painted them as everything from romantic heroes to bloodthirsty killers, and somewhere between them extremes lay the truth. The gang's exploits became the talk of every saloon and general store from the Missouri River to the Red. Dime novels started featuring their adventures, mostly made-up tales that was about as true as a rattler's promises, but they spread the legend all the same. The Daltons became larger than life, and maybe that's what led to their downfall, starting to believe in their own legend. The Fatal Decision. On October 5, 1892, the Dalton gang rode into Coffeyville, Kansas, looking to make history. Their plan was bold as brass and twice as dangerous. They aimed to rob two banks at once, the First National and the Condon Bank, right there in their old hometown where everybody knew their faces. Some say it was pride that drove them, trying to outdo the James Younger gang's record. Others reckon it was just pure foolishness. They disguised themselves with fake beards and different clothes, but you might as well try to disguise a wolf as a sheepdog in a town where you grew up. The minute they tied their horses in the alley and split up to hit the banks, people started whispering, "Them's the Daltons." The Last Stand. What followed was the kind of gunfight that turns into legend. The citizens of Coffeyville, armed with everything from shark guns to buffalo rifles, turned their town into a shooting gallery. Lead filled the air thick as bees in springtime, and the streets ran red with blood. Bob and Grat Dalton, Bill Power, and Dick Broadwell never made it out of town. They fell under a hail of bullets that would have done justice to a small war. Only Emmet Dalton survived, despite taking 23 wounds that would have killed a lesser man. When the smoke cleared, for citizens of Coffeyville lay dead alongside the Outlaws, making it one of the bloodiest days in Western history. The aftermath. Emmet Dalton lived to serve 14 years in the Kansas State Penitentiary, where he had plenty of time to ponder the high cost of outlaw fame. After his release in 1907, he moved to California and spent his remaining years trying to make honest amends for his wild youth. He wrote books, appeared in movies about his life, and spoke against the glamorization of the outlaw life. The Dalton gang's reign might have been short, barely 2 years of serious outlawing, but they left a mark on Western history deep as wagon ruts across the prairie. Their story became part of the larger tapestry of the American West, a cautionary tale about the thin line between law and lawlessness, and how quick that line can be crossed. Legacy and legend. The Dalton gang's story ain't just about bank robberies and shootouts, it's about the changing of the West itself. They operated in that twilight time when the frontier was closing down, when railroads and telegraph wires were stitching the wild places into civilization. In some ways, they were like the last wolves howling against the coming of the sheep farms. Their legacy lives on in museums across Kansas and Oklahoma, where their guns, photographs, and other artifacts draw crowds of visitors still fascinated by their story. The buildings where they made their last stand in Coffeyville still stand, bullet holes and all, silent witnesses to that fateful October morning. The human side. Behind the legend and the gunsmoke, the Daltons was real people with real stories. They had sisters who lived quiet, respectable lives, and brothers who never strayed from the straight and narrow. Their mama, Adeline, went to her grave believing her boys was more sinned against than sinning. Maybe that's the real tragedy of the tale, how good men with good beginnings can end up on the wrong side of history. Bob Dalton, for all his coldness in action, was known to be generous to poor folks and kind to children. Grat had a reputation as a ladies' man and a fine singer. Emmet was barely more than a boy when he rode into Coffeyville, following his brothers with the kind of loyalty that makes you wonder if it was courage or foolishness. The times they rode in. Understanding the Dalton gang means understanding their times. The 1890s was an era of change and uncertainty in the American West. The frontier was closing, the buffalo was gone, and the old ways was dying. Railroad companies and banks held power that common folks couldn't fight except through the ballot box or the 6-gun. The Daltons wasn't the first outlaws to take up arms against the system, and they weren't the last. They rode the same trails as the James Boys, the Younger Brothers, and other famous outlaws of their day. Each of these gangs had their own story, but they all shared something in common. They were products of their times, men who chose to fight against the coming of a new order, even if their methods were all wrong. The end of an era. The death of the Dalton gang in Coffeyville marked more than just the end of another outlaw band, it was part of the closing chapter of the Wild West itself. Within a few years, automobiles would replace horses, telephones would make it harder for outlaws to stay ahead of the law, and the kind of wild freedom the Daltons represented would exist only in memory and myth. Today, we look back on their story through the lens of time, and maybe we see something different than what their contemporaries saw. We see the complexity of human nature, the price of choosing the wrong path, and the way legend can grow from the seed of truth until it becomes something larger than life. The final word. The saga of the Dalton gang is writ large in Western history, a tale of brothers who rode the Owl Hoot Trail together and died together, except for Emmet, of Lawmen who crossed over to the dark side, and of a time in American history when such things were still possible. Their story serves as a reminder that the line between hero and villain ain't always as clear as we might like it to be, and that sometimes the most interesting tales are the ones that make us uncomfortable with their moral ambiguity. As the sun sets on their story, we're left with the echo of hoofbeats across the Kansas prairie, the lingering smoke of 6 guns, and the eternal question of what drives good men to choose the outlaw trail. The Dalton gang might be long gone, but their legend rides on, as wild and untamed as the frontier they once roamed. In the end, maybe that's their real legacy, not the banks they robbed or the lives they took, but the way their story continues to captivate us, reminding us of a time when the West was wild and anything seemed possible, for better or worse. As Emmet Dalton himself said in his later years, the outlaw trail looks mighty wide and easy at the start, but it grows narrower and narrower until it ain't nothing but a dead end. And that's the story of the Dalton gang, true as I can tell it, straight as an arrow and honest as daylight. It's a tale that belongs to the ages now, like the wind across the prairie and the stars over Kansas on a clear night, reminding us that sometimes the most fascinating stories are the ones that end in tragedy, leaving us to ponder the choices that lead men down the outlaw trail. The end. Join the adventure with the Western Echoes, Cowboy Tales Unleashed. If you're loving our cowboy stories and captivating tales, don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button to stay updated on all our future posts. Saddle up and ride along with us.